Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. T here yet again for our 8th Amendment video. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just jump right in, and I should get this video done like 3 minutes less than what my normal time is, because this amendment is short. It's really important, but it's short. It is literally the shortest amendment in the entire Constitution. It is only 16 words. Yes, I counted. And I'm going to read it to you. Because of how short it is, I'm going to read it. The 8th Amendment says, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. That's it. That is literally all the amendment says. So, now that you know what the amendment says, and if you actually paid attention at the beginning of the video when I put the amendment, you know, I'm going to get into it. So, why do we have the 8th Amendment in the first place? The reason is back in the olden days, back when we were part of the British Empire, you know, we were British colonists before we kicked their butts in a war, 2 wars actually. Before any of that happened, we were British, and the British government, what they did is they had laws in place. Great Britain had a Bill of Rights too, just like we have our Bill of Rights, the first 10, okay? They had a Bill of Rights. They never, you know, followed it in the colonies, that's why we rebelled, but they had a Bill of Rights too. Our 8th Amendment is almost word for word the same as theirs. They're not their 8th Amendment, but their cruel and unusual punishment clause in their Bill of Rights. However, like I said, they almost never followed it in the colonies. So what happened was one, they allowed things like torture and things like that. I mean, Great Britain, if you've looked at like the medieval times, Great Britain, like, they knew how to torture people back in those days. You know, they imposed major fines on colonists for the little things. I mean, you know, taxes and things like that. They were just grossly overinflated for what they should have been. Like, these fines, excessive is an understatement. And the last thing was bail. They had, like, they made laws placing certain, like, things where you could get bail, but, like, the majority of the time, the judge who set the bail either set it, like, they would set, you know, $1 million bail for stealing a pack of gum, okay? It's just an exaggeration, but, you know, just to move a point. So, while they had laws in place during British times, they never really followed them. So that's why we passed the 8th Amendment, to protect us from these things, and we actually follow it, okay? The Supreme Court has stuck firm to it, and they've used it in a way where they've allowed certain things to happen, but they still followed the law. So that's the history of it. You know, Britain had the laws, but they didn't follow and things like that. Now I'm going to jump into it, and I'm just going to break this amendment into 3 parts: bail, fines, and punishment. Now you're probably thinking, aren't bail and fines the same thing? For those of you who think it, no, it's not. Bail is when you're charged with a crime. They set a bail on you. You pay the bail, and you get to go free. However, it's not like they wipe your charges away. You have to then go to a court hearing, and if you return to the court hearing, they give you your bail money back. So that bail is kind of like a loan you put down on something to kind of basically make sure, or a security deposit. There we go, that's even better. It's like a bail is like a security deposit saying, here's my money, so I'll be back for it when I come for my trial. A fine is like a fine is like a parking ticket, basically. You know, parking tickets are a version of fines. You know, not paying certain things, you get you get a fine slapped on it. That's a fine. Those are the difference. So, jumping in, what does it say about excessive bail? So, the Supreme Court ruled, there's a couple things they ruled. Really, there's only 2 major things I'm going to talk about for this. But the Supreme Court did rule that certain crimes it's okay if a state doesn't set bail for certain crimes. Things like like if you torture someone or murder someone, or if they're just heinous crimes, you know, or if you're, you know, being charged with being a sex offender, things like that. Now, like I said, it's different state to state, but the Supreme Court did say that certain crimes, you don't have to set bail for them. Okay, now if you steal like a pack of gum or something like that, or, you know, it's like something like that, then yeah, they have to set bail for it. But certain crimes, they don't, and the Supreme Court said that. Now, the other thing that I'm going to talk about with bails is, there was a court case called Stack v. Boyle in 1951, and it says that bail must be reasonably calculated. And what it means by reasonably calculated is, like, if let's say you stole something worth a few $1,000s, okay? They're not going to set a bail on you for money worth 10 times that or something like that. You know, your bail has to be reasonably calculated for the crime. All right, so obviously the worse the crime or the more severe the crime, the higher the bail. But they're not going to set bail for, you know, you stealing a pack of gum the same they would if you were to steal like a Lamborghini. Okay, that's not going to be the same amount of bail to get out. Stealing the Lamborghini is going to be a lot higher than the pack of gum. Okay? So it has to be reasonably calculated. Now, moving on, fines. The Eighth Amendment protects from excessive fines. And there's a couple things on this. The first one was Waters Pierce Oil Co. v. Texas in 1909. And what the Supreme Court said in that court case was, fines cannot be so excessive it would take property away from someone without due process. And what I mean is, they're not going to set a fine and say, okay, the fine is, we're going to take your house. That's not what they mean. The fine means, like, the fine is so excessive, you need to sell your home just to pay the fine. That's what they're saying. You can't set a fine that excessive to where you literally would have to sell your own property or give up your own property to pay these fines. Now, with that being said, is the little flip side to that, if you have to sell certain things, like, you have to have like a garage sale, something like that, that would be fine. But if you have to, get it, fine, that was punny. But if you have to, like, sell all your property, sell everything you, like, if you have to do that, that's when it gets excessive. The other thing the excessive fine clause does not apply to things like if you're at school, okay, like, let's say you go to school and you forget to pay something and they hit you with a fee, okay, or a fine on top of the thing you already pay. There's no excessiveness there. If the government does not benefit from that fine that's being set, then the excessive fine clause in the Eighth Amendment does not apply. So if the government is giving you the fine, or the government is reaping the benefits of that money that you have to pay in any way, then the Eighth Amendment comes in. However, if it's a private institution or someone who's stacking the fine on you for, let's say you didn't pay something, or let's say you rent a house and you go over your security deposits, things like that, the excessive fine clause in the Eighth Amendment doesn't come into play because the government isn't benefiting from it. And the last thing is fines can't, just like bail, fines can't be grossly disproportionate. Now, there was a court case, I can't remember the name of it, but it had to do with this gentleman who was leaving the United States, okay? And any amount of money over $10,000, you have to, claim, or you have to tell the agents at the airport or the border when you're leaving how much it was. The gentleman who was leaving didn't claim any of it, and it was like almost $400,000. And what happened was the border set a fine, or the court set a fine equal to the amount of money he had. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You can't set a fine over all the money they have like that. That's excessive. Okay? Now, the last thing, and that's cruel and unusual punishment. So getting right into it, in a court case called Furman v. Georgia in 1972, they set 4 standards if a crime was cruel and unusual. The first one was, is the punishment cruel and unusual? Sorry, not the crime. There's 4 standards. Is the punishment degrading to you? Like to you as an individual. If it's degrading, then it's cruel and unusual. The second one is it on a whim? Is the punishment just on a whim? Are they, if police officers or someone just see an inmate or someone there and they go over and just start beating him for no reason, that doesn't count. The third one is, does society reject the punishment? So things like waterboarding and torturing people and drawn and quartering and things like that, I think the general populace, okay, general, I don't mean like 1 or 2 individual, I mean the general populace. If the general society is against it, then it's cruel and unusual. And the last thing was, is it patently unnecessary? And that means, like, is the punishment just unnecessary? Okay, if you just go and start beating on someone, like, not necessarily on a whim, but you're planning to go beat someone, if it's not necessary, then it's cruel and unusual. Moving on, the Supreme Court case did rule a few things on cruel and unusual punishment, and most of them have to do with the death penalty. In 2005, they ruled that you can't implement the death penalty for someone under 18, or when the crime took place and when the person was under 18. They also ruled in 2002 that you can't give the death penalty to someone who's mentally ill. Another thing that the Supreme Court ruled was you cannot revoke someone's citizenship for a crime, period. Whether you're naturalized, which means you came to America legally, or if you were born here, you cannot revoke someone's citizenship for a crime. The other thing was, you can't, in California, there was this whole thing that happened, and the Supreme Court ruled you cannot give jail time for someone who is addicted to something. However, on the flip side to that, if someone is on something, like if they're drunk, like they're drunk in public, or they were smoking illegal substance, they were taking like cocaine, they were doing something like that, if they were just doing it, you can give them jail for it. But you can't jail them for being addicted to it. There's a difference. And the final thing is, the Supreme Court ruled that you cannot implement the death penalty unless a death has occurred. And that even includes rape. They even said in a specific court case that if someone rapes someone, man or woman, they said woman in the case, but they've extended it to men. If you rape someone but don't kill them, you cannot be given the death penalty. For you to be given the death penalty and it fit under and it applies to, and it doesn't apply to the Eighth Amendment, then you have to have killed someone. If you have not physically killed someone, you cannot get the death penalty. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot more on the Eighth Amendment, but I already went over my time. I know I already broke my promise, but we both know I was going to go over anyway. So, stick around for the Ninth Amendment and the 10th Amendment. We're going to do those two next, obviously, on states' rights and citizen rights and things like that. So, stay tuned for those, ladies and gentlemen, and as always, stay beautiful, Americans.